Вітаю! Мені стало цікаво, що думають пересічні американці з приводу російського нападу на Україну. Що вони взагалі знають про нашу державу? Що вони думають з приводу, чому почалась війна? І чи з захоплення вони ставляться до новин, в яких йдеться про мільярдні допомоги Україні? Так як я 7 років жив у США і в мене там багато знайомих та друзів, то я просто попросив деяких з них поділитись своєю думкою. В цьому відео я опитав 4 американців, які цікавляться політикою. І для балансу 2 з них голосували за Трампа і 2 за Байдена. На жаль, узагальнити їхні думки на всіх американців ми не зможемо, але принаймні це дасть нам зрозуміти деякі їхні настрої. Отже, дивіться в цьому відео, що думають американці на теми, пов'язані з Україною, та як вони вимовляють «паляниця». Спершу коротко познайомлю вас зі своїми знайомими. Майк. Це мій друг, познайомився з ним в 2013-му на вечірці. На моє велике диво, Майк багато знав про Україну, як для американця, і гарно розбирається в політиці. Він працює менеджером в компанії інтернет-провайдингу. Ерік – то мій знайомий, з ним я познайомився аж в 2009 році на роботі в університеті. Ерік вважає себе лібертаріанцем, тобто це третя політична сила, на відміну від демократів та республіканців, які вже нам відомі. Він працює комедіантом, пародує Трампа, доволі непогано в нього виходить. Тоні, мій друг, дуже крутий фотограф поруч з Бостоном, познайомився з ним в 2012 році. Він тоді лише починав свою кар'єру фотографа, а я шукав собі гарні фото. Пітер – це, як його раніше називав, професор Хіпсон. Це викладач в моєму університеті. І я у нього був студентом предмету Project Management. Отже, перейдемо безпосередньо до самих питань. За кого ти голосував? Що думаєш про кандидата, за якого ти не голосував?
Oh, I voted for Trump in the previous election.
Trump. What do you think about Biden?
I think he's not a very competent president. I think he essentially makes rash decisions. He hides from the media. He doesn't tend to explain himself very well.
In the general election, I voted for Trump. The Democrats ended up nominating Joe Biden. There was no way I could support Joe Biden for president. A lot of people on the right get riled up over wokeism. To me, Biden and his people playing into that and like putting rainbow flags on everything, and it's very disingenuous. They don't really care. They don't care about those constituencies. They don't care about those issues. Not to mention, he's almost 80 years old, and cognitively, the guy's not there. I call his presidency elderly abuse.
I voted for Biden mostly because there were no other alternatives that I thought were viable, because I thought Trump being president again would be kind of dangerous, but I had no great love of Biden by any means.
I voted for Biden. I have an extremely bad opinion of Mr. Trump. I felt he was dishonest and corrupt. As such, I did not feel he was an appropriate candidate for president. I was happy that he did not get reelected.
Назови будь-які факти, які ти знаєш про Україну. До 5.
Country in Eastern Europe, ex-Soviet state. Country's very old. It predates most of the World War II, World War I creations. Flag colors are the blue and the gold. I mean, I've seen the flag many times.
Current President Zelensky was a comedian and an actor before who was on a show that posited a fictitious, I think he was like a high school or social studies teacher. 2019, the dude became president and he kind of ran on a anti-corruption platform. There's Poroshenko. He was more aligned with more open to the West.
Yes.
And then the Kremlin-backed guy was Yanukovych. Then there was the poisoning.
Yushchenko in 2004.
Right, he was, and it's probably the Russians who poisoned him or Putin. You had the Maidan protests that went on. They call it the Winter of Fire. Ukraine has a segment of its population who would want to be more aligned with the United States and the West. And then there's a segment of the population are historically linked with Russia and the Soviet Union, and they would want to maintain more of a closeness to Putin and the Kremlin and Russia.
It was part of the USSR. It's pretty religious from what I understand. The majority of people are Orthodox Christian.
Orthodox.
Chernobyl was in Ukraine. And I also know of it from this old silent film called Battleship Potemkin, which was by Eisenstein. Because I studied film history. There was that famous scene on the Odessa steppes where all those people were being killed. And I know it's the largest country in Europe.
I don't really have any. My biggest, I'm not sure it's a random fact, is you. That I had you as a student and that's where you were from.
На твою думку, чому Росія почала широкомасштабну війну з Україною?
Because it's like main Soviet state that's missing. Putin wants the Soviet Union back. Putin himself says the greatest disaster of the last 100 years is the fall of the Soviet Union. But I'd also say that Ukraine's unique history with Russia makes it more important than the rest of the bloc.
So one reason you said was to revive Soviet Union historical ties. You didn't say anything about NATO expansion or something like the popular theory in US.
The NATO one is a red herring. I don't think that's real. Because if that was their actual concern, they wouldn't have invaded a country, then further expanding NATO.
You know, I think it's just a matter of Ukraine being a buffer between Putin and Russia and the rest of the West.
To prevent further NATO expansion.
Yeah, further influence and expansion of Western entities, NATO, the European Union.
Any other reasons?
Well, I mean, Putin, he gives some reasons. I don't necessarily agree with them. I think the main reason is him flexing and trying to, you know, show that he's big dog on the block over there and has power, and that he can just get away with pretty much anything he wants without consequences.
To prevent NATO from expanding and to show the West the might of all Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I know, you know, Putin misses the old Soviet days, and
so kind of revive the Soviet days, bipolar world,
the glory of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
But yeah, I think mainly those are.
Yeah, so I was pretty unclear on that, but my understanding is that they wanted to get rid of the government and so that they wouldn't be able to join NATO. That's kind of my impression. I have no idea what they mean by the demilitarization and denazification. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. And as far as like what the media has sort of described, I don't think it's been clear at all.
So you don't have an understanding what made Russia launch the invasion. Your best guess would be to prevent NATO expansion.
Yeah, because my vague sort of understanding is that if Ukraine were to join NATO, then Russia would have more trouble in attaining whatever objectives they have in the future.
I see it as greed for power. Moscow wants to rebuild itself the way it was back during the Cold War, which means that they need to be a larger country, as large as they can get. So they see the Ukraine as being an asset to them that they could take.
Okay, so basically rebuilding Soviet Union.
Very much so. They may have a number of differences. It may not be as communist as the Soviet Union was.
Rebuilding the empire.
Yeah, rebuild the empire.
So that's one reason. Any other reasons do you think Russia could have invaded?
It is also possible they are looking for additional natural resources, again, to strengthen up their economy and their power.
Чи в національних інтересах Америки допомагати Україні захищати себе?
Yes. So I personally am okay with it. Like, would I support Ukraine if they were being unjustly assaulted, even though the U.S. government was against it? Yes, I would. And I think it's also in the best interest of U.S. properties and stability of our properties to support you, but not directly.
Well, basically what Biden is doing now, more or less.
More or less what Biden's doing now currently.
Do you think helping Ukraine is not in United States national interest?
Well, you know, helping them in a way that is overt and not underhanded, and one that would give rise to more tension and conflict in the region. I just think that the U.S. getting more and more involved and then it moving towards military action really just opens Pandora's box. So I'm really in favor of exhausting all diplomatic options and efforts before we get to a hot war. When is it decided where it ends? Okay, here's 40 billion. What's next? How much more do you guys need? Yeah, that is a detriment to the United States for sure.
Do you think it's in the U.S. national interest to be helping Ukraine defend itself?
Yeah, I do. Well, for one, it seems like the right thing to do because obviously it's a horrible thing that's happening and it seems unprovoked. So how could we not?
The moral, ethical aspect. Yeah.
Especially when we stuff ourselves into all sorts of wars anyway, even when there's less reason to help people. So why would we not help when there's an actual reason?
Right. So you feel like it's in United States national interest to aid Ukraine, but the connection of how that is, you can't clearly say.
Yeah, I would have to do research, but it's definitely not made publicly.
I think the United States does need to support the Ukraine. The United States has to walk a very narrow path. They have the issues of not wanting to escalate this any more than necessary. I believe that Russia and Moscow need to be held in check. I also feel that it's extremely wrong to just invade another country.
Штати зараз допомагають Україні захищати себе мільярдами доларів коштами платників податків. Як ти ставишся до цього?
What the United States government does, it provides support to many countries around the world. I think that generally helps America to keep the world and assets stable. To keep a European entity stable, I think helps the United States. Stability is the core of how Europe and the United States like to do things through economic means. So yes, I am okay with military aid going to Ukraine through U.S. dollars.
I don't support a continuous blank check of U.S. tax dollars when we have so many problems here in our own country that are just perpetually ignored. Trump people are like, oh, the border wall that Trump wanted would have cost way less than what we're sending to Ukraine. That's one argument you hear. And then people on the left say, I want Medicare for all of our citizens, and that's $40 billion we could have put towards improving healthcare in our country. So
I'm fine with it. We spend such an enormous amount of money on the military anyway that it seems like a similar sort of from the same pocket. You know, it's global spending, and if you need it, then why not? We spend crazy money on crazy things, and this seems like an important thing, so I'm all for it.
We've always had a long-standing tradition that a taxpayer doesn't get to say where their tax dollars get spent. The government spends it as it sees fit. Most Americans are, as far as I can see, complacent with the way things are going at the moment.
Яку роль США ти бачиш в цій війні?
I'm behind supporting, I think we just gave you 50-mile artillery weapons, a bunch of that, $700 million to kind of like get long-range weapons so that you guys can kind of keep the offensive. I think that is an okay aspect to continue to put weapons like this, but it probably should stay limited like that. Zelensky's been asking for a no-fly zone from NATO. I think that would be not unqualified. I don't think it'd be the right move at this time.
I take a very libertarian approach to foreign policy and kind of a hands-off, laissez-faire. The United States, like I said before, through intelligence, through training, through arms, through money. I don't like that. The United States' role should be if I was president right now, I would do everything in my power to leverage every little bit of influence and strength that the United States have. I would call for a summit, a meeting with Putin and Zelensky, and I would either invite them all to the White House or I would propose to go meet over there somewhere, maybe in a neutral country, and meet and hash the thing out, figure out what everybody wants, what are reasonable expectations, and how can we stop the bloodshed.
I mean, the obvious thing as like a human being would be do whatever you can to help Ukraine. But then there's all these layers that you wonder what would happen. Would it be worse overall for the world? But I don't know. It's so complicated.
I think that at this stage, what they're doing now, which is providing support for Ukraine, is the way to go. Some of the stuff that the Ukraine is getting from other countries is actually really originating from the United States.
Путін в своїй промові перед початком широкомасштабного наступу сказав, що метою цієї військової спецоперації є денацифікація, демілітаризація України. Як ти думаєш, що він мав на увазі під словом денацифікація?
I can only suspect that it's the Nazis, a great supervillain. The world supervillain, if you point them out, everyone's immediately like, oh, well, that's bad. They must be terrible. But I don't remember him showing any evidence of Nazi presence. So I'm not really sure where he pulled the Nazi card from, other than using it as some kind of like tagline word. Goring rather said, when Nazis return, they'll come back saying you're the Nazi.
What makes him say denazification of Ukraine?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing is the Azov-type people who are likened to neo-Nazis and far-right uber-nationalists who comprise elements of the military or the National Guard. But I think it's a talking point that Putin's using to probably mask his other intentions or his real true intentions of what he's 100% after. So it's kind of a flashy, attention-getting thing to say. I'm going to denazify all of Ukraine.
What makes him say denazification of Ukraine?
I just assumed, again, without knowing, that it's a propaganda type situation where he needs to have some sort of reason for his people as to why, a justification for his country as to why they're doing it. But I don't know what that actually implies at all.
I think it says it because it sounds good to him. There's no question in my mind that it is simply an invasion with the idea of taking over. Very similar to what Hitler did during the Second World War.
So basically fabricated empty words.
Very, very much so. He'll use whatever sounds pretty and sounds nice.
Ти знаєш, хто такий Степан Бандера?
Do you know Stepan Bandera?
No.
You do know Stepan Bandera.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, I didn't know about him until this whole thing.
What do you know of him?
I mean, my general understanding is that in some segments of Ukrainian society, he's a nationalist hero. He's viewed as an ardent pro-Ukrainian, somewhat of a folk hero. And then in some view him as a collaborator is the right word, Nazi collaborator, but he had to go with what was going on at the day to, meet his goals. And if it meant aligning with Nazis or Nazi philosophy to forward his objectives and goals, then, certainly he would do it. It's a name that's come up as an influence on the hard right in Ukraine, who are either in the Azov battalion or aligned with it or want to join it. Kind of look to him as inspiration.
Do you know Stepan Bandera?
I don't. I've never heard the name.
Do you know Stepan Bandera?
Not really.
This question is an indicator. Are you affected by Russian propaganda? The fact that you don't know who that is means that you're not.
Що тобі відомо про біолабораторії в Україні?
The biolabs very well do exist. They are American funded, but biolabs exist everywhere.
Yeah.
Labs looking for disease center of control, etc. Russia latched onto for its propaganda is the biolabs had disease control. So with disease control, they're replicating these diseases. You're really not supposed to go to certain lengths with that. Easily, I can throw in the word weaponized. You use almost the truth and then just throw the word weaponized in the truth. So think about if you're actually studying diseases, you actually have to put these diseases into things to study it, right? Weaponized. Immediately it's propaganda.
Dude, there are probably biolabs everywhere. Probably that narrative was used to exploit the situation and what was happening to try to give one side the upper hand. Watch out for these biolabs, and of course we just had Corona that happened over the last 2 years. So the last thing anyone in the world wants is something getting out of a lab and causing another global pandemic. So I think that was just more bullshit thrown into the stew.
Do you know anything about biolabs in Ukraine?
No, not really. I don't.
Not really. A few rumors, but I've not heard anything that I would consider trustworthy or something that I really would say, okay, here is something that I need to look at.
В твоєму соціальному оточенні скільки людей за те, щоб підтримати Україну, а скільки проти? Надай приблизну оцінку в відсотках.
I could never give you an accurate thing, but I'd say, like, my opinion, 80-20. Very few people are Ukraine. I think in part of that 20 they're not anti-Ukraine, they just don't fucking care. If you ask the general Joe walking down the street in the part of the United States I live in, you will find overwhelming support.
God, it's hard to put a number on. Yeah, 60-40. I roll with libertarians and people who are against it. So my corner of the internet, my corner of the world politically, we're all against it. We think it's a fool's errand and America needs to step back and not be sending billions of dollars to further escalate and expand this conflict. I think overall your average American is not for it.
I think everybody, and I think if anybody didn't think that, they might not say it. I don't know why they would think not to help Ukraine. I don't know what that would possibly be, what logic that would have.
I'd say at least 75%.
75 to 25.
Yeah. The majority of my friends are quite supportive to the Ukraine and to their position and situation.
Скажи паляниця.
Паляниця.
Palamita.
Palanitsa.
Palanita?
Yeah, so now we would know you're not Ukrainian. Only Ukrainian can pronounce it right.